afternoon. Welcome to today's Job Hunters Help Desk. I'm Simon Ward and I'm joined by Greg Wyatt, as we are every week. We try to do this help desk every Wednesday at 1 o'clock. The purpose is really just to have conversations and engagement with people who are out in the marketplace looking for work and see if we can help in any way we can from our range of experiences. My background, I'll ask Greg to talk about this, and so my background is recruitment fundamentally through and through. I jumped the fence in about 2000 and worked a lot on the buy side, which means the buy side of the recruitment cycle. So an employer side, building a fast growing SAP and then e-commerce business, working for people also then like Legal & General, I was head of recruitment. And I even sold some RPO, some recruitment process outsourcing deals towards the end of my corporate career. I'm now a career coach and I'm one of the joint hosts of the Job Hunters Help Desk. I'll ask Greg just now to quickly give a talk through your background and then talk about stuff.
Hi all, or hi both, if there's just the two of them. So I'm a career recruiter. I mean, I started out my recruitment career working for my dad in my GCSE weekends, updating filing cabinets, thermal fax machine, if you remember those. So I've had a bit of a strange career, sort of mixing things up. But as well as running my own little business as an agency recruiter, so supplying candidates to employers, I also do occasional fractional talent acquisition work. So I work within organisations to manage their programs, or I support recruitment of organisations. So, for instance, recently I've written some adverts for a company. I've audited other people's adverts. So I've kind of seen recruitment from different sides of the fence, three sides of the fence, if you like. But through that, and as we've gotten to know each other for the same reason, always spent time trying to help people through their job searches, mainly because I know how difficult it is. I mean, I had a difficult job search in 2001 when the bubble burst in the IT sector and we had September the 11th. Things have changed a lot since then, but a lot of the challenges remain the same. So whatever we can do to help people improve their odds is why we're here.
I think the most important thing is that multi-lens view of the market. So Greg and I have both been or are supply side recruiters. So we see that engagement with the candidate as a recruiter, classic sort of supply recruiter, recruitment consultant. Greg and I both have experience on the other side of the fence, utilising the services of recruitment consultants and hiring directly as well, which is important. We've been candidates, and one thing that Greg doesn't talk about as much as he should is the work that he does directly with job hunters to help as a free of charge service, largely, I think, where Greg just engages and tries to help in any way he can. And I think that's more the way that my career has gone over the last 12, 18 months or so. So that's the purpose and the background of us too. The idea of today is that you comment and make any contributions that you feel are relevant. We've already got Ed on, which is great. Good to see you. And although Greg and I will come up with our views of certain challenges or whatever that we're discussing, it's really important that you do too. So let us know about your experiences. Let us know if you think we're talking completely like twaddle too, because that happens occasionally.
And only on Wednesdays at 1.
Sorry again.
That's the only time we talk twaddle, on Wednesdays at 1.
Well, it usually actually starts about 1:45. That's when the greatest twaddle gets talked offline, I think. But yeah, there's a bit of that, and asking questions as well, because if Greg and I don't have the answers, there's like to be someone online or someone who watched this on the recorded version and will give you an answer on the events page as well. So try to do that. Today, we're going to spend a bit of time looking at the mistakes that job hunters tend to make. None of them are made deliberately. No one sets out on a job. I tell you what, I think this is a really terrible thing to do, but I'm going to do it and see how it works. That isn't how it is. So most of the errors that people make are made in ignorance and can be very minor in many ways, but can have a really large repercussions about the knock-on effect of how people evaluate you in a job hunt. So we're going to talk through those. I am going to try better, and I am rubbish at this, but I'm going to try better today to try to organise our time so that we don't have to accelerate the way we talk in the last 5 minutes. And
Simon, it's 2 o'clock. We better finish up.
Yeah. Oh my God, I was only me talking. So what we can do a session on just the general overriding sort of errors that we see job hunters make. We're then going to look more closely at CVs, and then application communications with recruiters or hiring managers or employers. And then we'll talk about the interview and the offer stage as well, where errors can be made. But I think there are a few. Both Greg and I have done a little bit of prep for this, which is not unusual because we don't just throw this together. But Greg has been talking to recruiters, and I've been talking to HR professionals, and asking them fundamentally the same question: what are the mistakes that candidates make? And Greg, you got some interesting views from recruiters.
Yeah, actually, I'll open up my post so I can remember what I said. Bear with me.
I think I commented on that post.
It was. You did, yeah. I think mistake number one's not being prepared, though, isn't it?
I put the enlightened icon up. It was interesting.
So I'm on a private recruiters group. We got a little WhatsApp group which we share ideas on from time to time. So I asked them yesterday, what are the main mistakes that you commonly see candidates do when they're applying through those agencies? And obviously, how agencies recruit is a little different to how employers recruit. So your point around the HR piece and how companies do it directly is equally relevant. It's just a slightly different place in the recruitment process. So just in the order that I've written it, mistake number one, no contact details, which it's quite common. And I can kind of see why it happens when people apply for a job on LinkedIn. LinkedIn holds your contact details, but then the CV doesn't have contact details on it. Or incorrect ones as well. You swap a mobile number. I had a candidate yesterday I spoke to who said, I'm not getting very many calls. And I commented, well, yeah, have your mobile number on your CV. So that might be part of it. Mistake number two, too much fluff on the front page of their CV. Get to what matters ASAP, experience, job skills, qualifications. So that's something we can talk about later, but it actually relates quite closely to a copywriting principle, which is what you should consider when you're looking at your CV. Point number three, which is from me, lacking context. We aren't mind readers. So what I mean by that is people tend to put their companies on their CVs, for example, and as a reader, we might not know who that company is. So the nature and size and what that company is doing has a lot of relevance to the nature of the job within it, and it can rule in or rule out people. So context for me, as you know, Simon, because I bore you often about it, is king. Lacking flexibility is number four. This recruiter had a senior unemployed candidate choose a squash game with a friend over a final interview slot for a permanent vacancy. A key point being that he was out of work, and the other candidate represented by the recruiter got the job. Whether or not it's fair of the employer to not give an additional time to that candidate is a different question, but it's their choice, isn't it? So you either play the game or you don't. Point number five, not tracking their applications. And I think I'm sure every recruiter's experienced us calling an applicant to a specific job and the person saying, which job is this? I actually had one of those for someone who ended up getting that job. So I did give her some advice that she should track it, which I think she took on board. But if recruiters are busy, it's not a great first impression. And the last one, just on that post, no one follows up their applications. It stands out. So, I think you should follow up. It doesn't always work, but for the people that care about it, it does help.
I think there are a few really good things. I think that first thing about contact details, I always try to get guys to put basic contact details in the footer of their CV. So name, phone number that you'd like to use for your job hunt, and your email address, and it's there. There are still the odd old bloke like me around who print off CVs and maybe read them on the tube or the bus or the train on the way home. And if you lose the front page of a CV and the second page is exactly what you're looking for and there are no contact details, it can keep you awake at night. So just put those contact details into the bottom, the footer of your CV, and they're always there. And whatever anyone is looking at, they know that they can find you, because at the end of the day, that's a loss. And the other point about the current employer, I think when we live our lives and we go into the same place day after day after day, we assume that everyone else shares our experience. So we assume that people know who ABC Limited are and how big they are and what they do, and that context is so important to evaluating you, because recruiters, hiring managers, internal recruiters, HR people look for relevant candidates, and it is just a greater risk if you're too high level, too big, shall we say, for the role that someone is recruiting, as if you're too small for it. So giving people a feel for scale and what you have done is really important. It's interesting that
exactly that.
Scale.
So say you're a salesperson and you achieved a £1.5 million sales target. If you're in a small business of £1.6 million, then that's an incredible achievement. But if you're in a big business and you're a bottom salesperson and you only hit 50% of the threshold, those two statements can be exactly the same, both true and have very different meaning, and context is what separates it.
I think that's absolutely right. And every small business I have worked with or got to know at all thinks that they are the size, their scale makes them special, and therefore only a certain type of person can work in that scale of business. And equally, when I work in big organizations like Legal & General or any of the sort of multi-thousand headcount businesses I've worked with, they think that only people who've had that experience can survive, manage the complexity of a big business. Whether you agree with that or not is actually irrelevant. If the people hiring have that view, you're on a real uphill battle to try to persuade them that they're wrong. So make it very clear that where you are in your scale, I think it helps in terms of understanding your responsibility, your authority, everything. So scale is important. Let me just see now. I haven't done this for a while, so I'll probably put this wrong. But this is this comment from Martin. Oh yeah, it has appeared there. Brilliant. I reckon the trend in market candidate is candidates playing safe so they don't get rejected. Which I think, if you're true, Martin, if that's true, Martin, if you're right, I think that's really sad. The trouble is, as Martin points out, they don't attract anybody either. So they're almost more likely to be rejected. They should show a little more ambition to elevate themselves from the pack. If they can be very attractive, it can be a very attractive trait. And I'll go to the other side to read this. Sorry. Be a very attractive trait when everybody else gives the impression they'll take a step back. So we're talking about ambition and selling yourself, I think, probably there.
Yeah, I completely agree with it. And actually, I think part of a reason for that is a lot of the generic advice that you see on LinkedIn. But that, for me, is one of the number one mistakes people make, is to assume that advice given on LinkedIn is right in all contexts. And we talked about this earlier, customizing CVs and such. So the problem with customizing a CV for an application, if everyone's doing it, they're doing it based on the information they see within a job advert. Now, I don't know about you, but most job adverts I see are hyper generic, and you could take the core of that advert out and then look at another advert with the same job title and it'll be broadly the same. So if you're customizing against a generic document that might not be 100% representative of a role, then maybe you're customizing against 70% fit. So you lean your CV into that, and what you've changed in your CV is the same that everyone else has done. Whereas actually what you could do is just lean into your strengths, your specific achievements, the context in which you've operated in, which won't be right for everyone because you can't be all things to all people. But your strengths will help stand you out where they matter. So if you're going in for a generic application, my argument, I got into a small debate with a career coach yesterday, was that if you sell yourself in the best possible light with one core CV for a role, with minor adjustments to speak their terminology and show essential requirements, then you'll inherently be a stronger candidate for a role that you're better suited to. Whereas if everyone's doing the generic safe thing of, I'll customize my CV by saying what the advert says in my CV, then everyone's doing it. So people go word blind. It said that again. So let's look at the job titles. I've got the same job titles. Poor readers, 400 CVs that all look at the same.
But that touches on something that I think is really, really important, and that is that since first lockdown and pandemic, which was 5 years ago, I think the level of advice and guidance that is available to job hunters has gone through the roof. And I mentioned this before. So what used to be a differentiator has now become common garden. So, and I you always use the thank you after an interview, the note to say thank you after an interview is, if you are interviewing, the worst part of my life, I was interviewing 10 people a day, 5 days a week, 50 emails coming in saying exactly the same thing, that they're really grateful I gave them their time and thank you very much for the opportunity. Wasn't a differentiator anymore. It was water off the duck's back. And I think that's true to some extent. I'm not sure if I agree with you completely, but I'm not going to have that round out about.
I do think you should customize your CV.
I absolutely agree with to have that base CV, have a really, really strong base CV, and any sort of alteration, I think, is very small. You don't rewrite.
You just have to be intentional. And why are you doing it? If you're just doing it because it's what you think you should do, then what are you actually achieving?
And we also got, I think we always have to look for the motive in the same way that in an interview we look for the why are they asking it as well as what are they asking. I think I always enjoy conversations with clients who are questioning why I'm giving them the advice I do. And I've become an old cynic over time. And I think sometimes people who sit in seats very similar to mine often give advice like, you've got to practically rewrite your CV for every job application, because that in almost guarantees that your clients are going to come back to you and talk to you about each job application. And if you're billing on an hourly basis, which fortunately I don't, but if you bill on an hourly basis, then you're actually feathering your own nest. Now, I'm not saying that of all coaches. I think generally we're a reasonably highly ethical market, but there are definitely people who create propositions and give advice to ensure that they are guaranteeing their own work. I think we just have to be slightly cynical and question why you're giving that advice as what is the advice as well.
I think there's only one answer that's applicable to probably 95% of questions that you see on recruitment. Should it be a 2-page CV or should I do this before an interview? And that answer is it depends.
Yeah,
it depends on the situation. Any poster advice you see that is unequivocal, so it says you must do this to access the hidden jobs market or to beat the ATS or to guarantee something or the other, you have to question why they're asking that, because recruitment's about nuance. I mean, as we talked about earlier, there's no consistent way to recruit. There's no professional development scheme in recruitment that I'm aware of anywhere in the world.
No.
You see professional development within related fields like HR through the CIPD or what have you. But in terms of recruitment professionals or recruitment agencies, most of it's from within the organisation, or you do have membership bodies like the REC, but actually if you look at what they offer, they're not necessarily about serving the recruitment process. It's more about serving the recruitment agency.
Yeah, I will come to Edmund's comment in a moment, because I think it's worth discussing, but just before I do, I just wanted to make a general comment that I heard from an HR director today. Yesterday. He said, "I just wish candidates could cut us a bit of slack, be a little bit more empathetic, because they seem to assume that when they walk into a room, the person on the other side of the desk is a professional interviewer. They're not. They're a research and development director or they're sales director. They have another purpose in my business, because I don't employ a single person who has been employed purely and simply to interview candidates. And I just wish candidates would accept that sometimes they're sitting opposite someone who's as nervous as they are, and is going to mess up, and is not going to prepare properly, and is going to ask a stupid question first of all, and maybe hasn't been briefed brilliantly from the person before. Just cut us some slack and let us do our best."
So same for me. A good friend of mine's interviewing for a role this week, or rather they have a role that they're seeking to fill that they're interviewing for. And they said to me, they're doing 50-hour weeks with the job, really, really busy, a lot going on, a lot of deadlines to reach, but they want to do right by the recruitment process. So they're spending time going through these 60 applications. They've got 6 interviews coming up, spending an additional 10, 20% on top of 50 hours trying to interview with all the stress that's going on. It's not easy. It doesn't excuse bad behaviours, but I think just understanding what's going on behind the scenes is a good starting point.
I think we've all firefighted in our business where something happens around us and we have to react to it, and that becomes the primary concern. Just one brief story. When I was at a fast growth technical business, I spent about an hour with an internal hiring manager who was desperately trying to inspire me to work harder for him than anybody else in the business, because he desperately needed a chair filled, because it was relevant to financial services regulations. They had to fill the chair. And we spent an hour, maybe an hour and a half, with him just bullying and battering. "Son, could you do this? Could you do that? How quickly you can do it?" 2 days later, I met him on a landing in one of the hallways in our business, and I said, "Are you ready for your interview?" He went, "Oh, bloody hell, Tom, who have I got to see now?" And you go, "Well, 2 days ago, it was the single most important thing in your world. You had to fill that seat. Now I'm asking you to go and spend half the time you just spent with me telling me how important it is to go and actually fill the seat, and it's an inconvenience." And I think people must understand that's often the way that interviewing will come lower down the priorities, not because that job has become less important or candidates are less important. It's just other stuff has come in above it, and we're all human beings, and those behaviors take place. So I think it helps candidates immensely if they have some empathy with the person across the desk. And there was lots of stuff, particularly early on in the pandemic, of people putting posts up on LinkedIn. Well, I walked out of an interview because I hadn't read my CV, or well, that's kind of counterproductive. Or you won't believe it, they hadn't done this, they hadn't done that. I am pretty sure that if hiring managers had the time and could be bothered, they could put posts on LinkedIn criticizing candidates at an equal level. It's a massively imperfect process, massively imperfect.
Well, we do, don't we? You see a lot of recruiters and companies complaining about candidate behaviour, and the reason there's such equal complaints is because we're all flawed people.
Yeah, and we've got to accept that flaw in other people, I think, to move on. One rule that we always, and it seems really simple, but getting candidates to stand up to this, I found it a real challenge, is just do what you said you were going to do when you said you were going to do it, and set your own standards. Don't, because you're dealing with an HR person, a hiring manager, or a recruiter who has said they're going to come back to you on Tuesday, and by Wednesday they haven't come back to you. So you think, therefore, well, I told him I was going to send him this reference on Thursday, but it can't be important. I'll do it next week. Don't drop your standards because those around you are struggling to meet them. We do notice, both as external recruiters, I'm sure, hopefully Greg will agree with me, but we notice when candidates are unreliable. Even if we're being unreliable ourselves, we notice when candidates are unreliable. And certainly when you're the other side of the fence, you know which candidates are the ones who are going to do what they said they're going to do when they said they'd do it. You can rely on them, and you can tell an internal client in the business that an amended CV will be coming in on Tuesday because you know that guy's going to deliver it. So that's important too. Do you notice when people are unreliable, or am I talking complete guff and nonsense?
Well, of course you do, but I mean, I see it as an opportunity to improve what we do in recruitment, because there's a reason people are unreliable, and often it's because of a lack of a trust in the process, or they have their fingers burnt elsewhere. So I think, for me, really trying to understand why things happen. I mean, I'm prone to navel gaze anyway, but it's how I've always improved as a recruiter. I mean, there's a lot of issues in recruitment around ghosting, or people letting people down, or people accepting counter offers, all these things that you see as complaints. I rarely get that. And I think part of it's because I'm quite rigorous and I take the time to try and do things right. But part of it is because I try and create an environment of trust, so that if things do change, they feel safe to say, oh, no, I'm not interested anymore, or it's not the right role, or I've got a job, but they don't need to lie about it. So I think there's a reason why people are unreliable. And we do what we can to try and make them more reliable. Some people behave badly, no question about it.
The one thing that I found was really interesting when you're going through the list of the possible mistakes that candidates make from a recruiter's perspective. One of them was failing to follow up applications. Now, the other side of that fence gets awfully close to the ghosting argument.
Yeah,
and I think
it's different though. I think it's a question of intention. I think some people feel like they don't want to be too pushy. I mean, we had a guest a little while back who commented when I said, oh, such and such has followed up their application, and they got a response. And then he replied to say, oh, do you think I should do that? Isn't that a bit pushy, or words to that effect? So I think, following that's a question of intention. Even though you expect it not to work, why not just make that part of the process? Conversely, not replying to candidates, I mean, that's a choice by a hiring process a lot of the time. But that's our job. That's what we're paid to do. It's quite literally our job. So I don't think there's the same excuse.
This is a comment that's coming from Edmund. I know some of the background of this, because Edmund and I have spoken this week. And first of all, I'd like to say there's absolutely no excuse or no explanation or acceptable explanation for the experience that Edmund has had in this case. Be careful at what you post on social media, especially after an interview. I recently posted a very complimentary post about my experience of being interviewed by a large employer in the City of London. And I know that didn't go well. As I learned recently, during the decision-making window, some employers can be rather prickly. Edmund, I think that's generous. But again, I had a row with my 10-year-old son on the way to school today. And I try not to have rows with my son, full stop. And I definitely try not to have them on the way to school, where he has 6 or 7 hours now away from me to think what a git I have been and how much he hates me, and I've got to go and pick him up later. So I tried to avoid having rows on the way to school, and it was a really stupid thing. It was about how much rubbish he's watching on YouTube, and it bugs me. But actually, the underlying current was that something I'd got an email first thing this morning that really irritated me, and had put me on edge, and Freddie kind of got a little bit of that. And this isn't the case in Edmund's experience, because there is no excuse for Edmund for what happened to Edmund. But I do think, again, it's this cutting people some slack bit, that we have to accept that we're dealing with flawed human beings, as Greg just said, and sometimes they'll carry something with them into the interview room, or with them into the drafting of an email, or when they answer their phone, that actually is completely irrelevant to the person they're talking to, but they carry that mood into the meeting, and prickly is a good way of describing it. I mean, I know that I'm a failed and broken human being, has a terrible temper, and when it comes to the surface, I kept it under control this morning, I'm glad to say, although I made my point, I think. It wasn't Freddie's fault, and that could have been a candidate feeling back. I'd have been maybe more professional than I was to Freddie, but I would have probably been prickly. So I think that's a risk too.
I read a post this morning, which I'll read out actually, if you don't mind. It might take me a couple of minutes, but and it's from a brand strategist, but I think it's really relevant for a job search. Anytime you post online, so bear with me. So never ever 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 forget the purpose of the thing you're writing. Whether it's an ad campaign, an internal email, your entire brand strategy, or a please do your goddamn washing up sign for the office kitchen, every decision you make about exactly what to say and how to say it should be driven by what you need to achieve. And if you're looking for a job, your goal is to get a job. Yeah. So even if you're really frustrated, just think about your goal when you write something.
Yeah. And while we're talking about this, I suppose this falls into that general bucket of general behaviours. But I had quite a few of the HR directors that I was on a Zoom call with earlier this week say the same thing in different levels of veracity, that candidates can be quite rude and forget their manners. One, and I saw this on LinkedIn a little while ago, one of them used the example as we make them coffee and then they leave the coffee cup in the table in the room and never offered to take it out, or where they can go. We're quite happy to clear up after them, but it'd be nice if they just offered. Pushing through doors people know, in front of people, lots and lots of different things that came up that could be seen as bad manners. And Greg is now just about to have a similar conversation with his dog that I had with my son.
Yeah, I think my daughter's downstairs revising, and she thought that the dog's bothering her revision, so she put the dog outside and instead bother the 3 million views we've got.
You know what she needs? A little bit more empathy with your situation. That's what's required. But it's a good. She's downstairs revising. That's the key message in that. I think that's
mock exams tomorrow.
Oh God, they're doing SATs at Freddie's school, and everyone comes in early for breakfast, as if a Kit Kat's going to make all the difference. But we shall see. It's good. One other point I'll just make now, and then we can move on. I'll go back to the other comments we've got. One HR director said, "Can you tell your candidates to stop apologising, please?" So that candidates, because they're nervous and because they're going somewhere where they feel maybe a little bit more submissive than they would normally be, is they apologise for just about everything. And she said, if you actually think about it, use your language more carefully. So rather than saying, "I'm sorry I was late," say, "Thank you for waiting for me." It's a more positive statement. It's complimentary. And I've scrolled down. I'll dig them out a little bit. I've scrolled down about 5 or 6 things where, rather than saying "I'm sorry for this" or "I'm sorry for that," you can convert it to a positive statement and thanking them. Because nearly every apology is actually requesting or asking for some sort of forgiveness or
intentional language is so important. I remember it was probably about 20 odd years ago, and it's something that stuck with me ever since. This HR officer came out of an interview and she said, "Greg, I stuffed it up." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, I just made such a mistake with my language. I said, "I don't want you to think that." And as I said it, I knew that was exactly what that person was going to think.
Well, it's that thing, isn't it? And again, having a 10-year-old hands sort of keeps you on this. You come and said, "Dad, I can control whatever you think." And whatever you're thinking, I go, okay, yeah, okay, give me an example. I said, Dad, don't think of an elephant. Of course, the first thing, you can't stop your brain going to what's an elephant. So you have an elephant in your mind. And I think that's really important, that we need to be intentional. And I think
you are your language in a lot of situations.
And through your elevator pitch process, you should be beginning to build up a glossary of terms that you want to use to describe yourself.
But it's also your internal language as well, because a lot of those apologies come from how you trained yourself to think. So, trying to get rid of the negative self-talk is a really important part of a job search.
Yeah, and there's huge. I hadn't thought of it, but it's only when this particular recruitment director said it, I thought, oh my God, I probably spend too much of my time apologizing. And I was going to do that thing. I was going to start the stream late this morning and then say thank you for waiting for us, rather than saying I'm sorry that I was late. But I forgot. And I haven't got. I'm really sorry I forgot. But that's that sort of thing. I think just be really intentional. Create that glossary. Try to always imply the positive rather than negative, especially when you're talking about yourself. And I think
it's a common criticism in sales emails, which I expect is probably similar for if you're doing a networking message, which is, I apologise for this speculative email or words to that effect. Why are you apologising for doing your job?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's so many silly little things, and you hear it in everyday life. We're English. We apologise before we even got up in the morning. It's just the nature of the beast, I think. But I think thinking about that and trying to work some level of intentionality around what you're saying is important. Let's have a look. A couple of comments in from Malcolm. Let's see what this is. Trying to stand out could be fueling the trend of using AI in their hair. Oh, Malcolm, you just want to send us down a rabbit hole, don't you? That's what I think. I'm going to shut up. Great.
Well, it's a really good point, though, and actually, it's the same thing about customization, which is that the thing that AI is weak at is situational insight. So when you say, "Oh, here's a job description. Can you customize my CV against the job description?" It'll do exactly what you ask, but what it doesn't know is what's going on in your brain. So when you see a certain essential requirement in an advert, you might have a specific achievement which relates to that, which would highlight your suitability in a CV. And if you're going to customize, that's the kind of thing that you need to do. But because we're sort of democratizing the access to being able to customize through AI, everyone's doing it, and therefore everything looks the same, which kind of comes back to my point about why are we actually customizing in the first place, or is there something smarter we can do?
I think maybe 12 months, so 9-12 months ago, AI polishing of the CV was a differentiator, and some different platforms did it better than others, inevitably. But now there is such a move, particularly among people who are early in their career path, to send everything through AI. It's no longer a differentiator. And I think that's the problem. I think when we're talking about this, trying to differentiate our job hunt from others, it's almost like now we can do less to differentiate ourselves.
A recruiter called Mark Hopkins made a great comment when we did the last sort of similar topic, and he just said, what he'd most like from applications is for them to be qualified for the job. And I think if you ask most people who are looking to fill a vacancy, that would probably be quite similar. Not including bad behaviour, of which there's a lot, age discrimination and everything else around that, where people make arbitrary decisions, but that's kind of out of our control. But if you're going to customize a CV, it's to show how you qualified for a job. It's not necessarily to make words match.
Yeah, and also I think just to remember that you're in a process which is going to take you through several steps after your CV is read. So you need to make sure that you're working and developing momentum through that process, rather than thinking you're going to win the day by putting in a great CV that's been aligned by AI. Malcolm, another comment said, I think just in agreement with this, finding common ground with interviews is important. You're having a conversation. I don't know how many times I've said to clients, at the end of the day, an interview is nothing more than two or maybe more adults having a conversation about you. That's what an interview is. And yet there are books and books and books on interviewing technique, and some great guys doing some really good work with interviewing techniques. But we talk to people all the time. We share information all the time, and if we try to be interesting, we're probably trying to share the most relevant, interesting information with them. So I am becoming less and less committed to all of the fluff and nonsense that sits around interviewing, and who tries to take control in the first 30 seconds and who doesn't, and all this sort of stuff. I think it's a conversation. Be human.
I think the situation is a little different in the US, but I was speaking to a really notable job search coach, I think is the right phrase. And she said that a lot of the more nefarious CV writers are now becoming interview coaches. And there's advice around how to make STAR framework, so situation, task, action, result, which is one of the ways in which you ask competency interviews, into a real storytelling device. And what's happened is a lot of people are doing that, but it's just becoming really boring and long-winded. And once again, you're forgetting the whole point of the interview. So for me, I think an interview is really simple. Employers want to know if you can do the job, and they want to extrapolate what you like from your interview into what you like to work with. And I think that's kind of it. But where it gets complex is the competition, but you've no idea who they are. So all you can do is show them that you can do the job and show them what you like to work with. And as Malcolm says, that common ground is really important because you have to work with them.
And I think Edmund said in his second comment that sometimes being rejected can be a positive outcome. And I think possibly Edmund's comparing that with not hearing anything at all. But I think he's right. I think we've got ourselves into a situation, maybe because of people like me, where being rejected in an interview process is exclusively a negative thing. When in fact, actually, and not only is it a negative thing, it's a negative thing that's your fault. The candidate takes the blame. And there are a lot of coaches out there who then jump on the opportunity to try to improve your performance, etc. You may not have gone further in the interview process because you're not the right person for the job, that the job isn't right for you, or there's someone who's exceptionally aligned with doing the role. It doesn't mean you failed. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that you've underperformed. It just means that you haven't won this time, and maybe it's a saving grace.
I mean, it's difficult when you need a job to pay the bills and you've got a financial crunch coming up. That makes it really hard to detach. But the approach I take to sales, which I think works really well for me and it works well for a lot of people, is to find the insurmountable no's as early as possible. And that's what you should be doing in an interview, because if it's never going to work, the earlier you find out, the more time and bother you find you save yourself. Whereas if you confront all those insurmountable no's and they're all manageable, then what's left is viable. And it's completely the opposite way most recruiters work, which is to pitch a job and hope someone's going to say yes. And then it becomes hope they're interested, hope they don't drop out, hope they don't mess us about, hope they don't ghost us, which is all the stuff we see complaints about. Whereas if you go into it, knowing that you've got expertise that can solve problems within that organization, and therefore, as well as showing them how you can work, you need to get an understanding if you actually want to do the job. And you do that through facing those insurmountable no's, and that's really effective. And if you find those no's, that's a success, because you wouldn't have wanted to do it in the first place.
And I think that particular one of the many areas that applies to is salary and or potential salary as well, because there's an awful lot of stuff around how you can dance around that question, and you can throw it back at the interviewer, and she'll throw it back at you, and it goes back and forth. I don't understand at a really basic level that if you have a red line, bottom line for how much you want to earn, and you have a realistic view of what you're most likely, the best you could get, where you wouldn't share that range with an employer. And I don't understand why employers wouldn't share it back with you either. Because one of the
game
simple red lines is there isn't enough money for you. That's a red line. If you're not, and I personally think we'd get it out early. I have not seen in 20 or 30 years, I have not seen many candidates who are too expensive for the role being able to persuade an employer to pay more during the process. And I think we could all do with being more transparent about salary. That's my little hobby horse for the week. What are your thoughts on salary, Greg?
Well, it's complicated, and it's predicated on what the employer's philosophy and approach is. Some employers play a really dodgy game and they do lowball. Some employers, I mean, I was very fortunate I am very fortunate to have a client that I love working with. I've recruited for 10 years. And recently we had a candidate who was very overqualified for a role. And through that process, he decided actually he felt he was more valuable to the business than the budget allowed. And they agreed. So they paid him 20% above the budget. It doesn't always happen, but it was still built on trust and transparency.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I think sort of I think that doing a little bit of homework, being very clear about your red line, and if most importantly though, and I love the way your candidate handled that situation, building your relationship and talking about things and developing the case. The worry, I think, is I have known a number of candidates who are pretty sure they're too expensive for the role.
Robert makes a good point. It is about total compensation, but I think in most situations the bias is towards salary until you get to quite a senior level, or if there's things like restricted share options or welcome bonuses or car allowances or what have you. But I think for simplicity, salary is has to be fair and transparent.
I think bonuses become very difficult with certain roles in certain industries where bonus percentages or likelihood of percentages are thrown around in the interview process without any real commitment to them, because the wording in the contract of employment is going to be about performance. But I think trying to understand what the total package is. A client of mine recently accepted a role and was then delighted to find out that in fact the package was worth about 10% more than she'd anticipated, because there was a car allowance which no one had talked about all the way through, and then they popped it in as a cash allowance.
And the other thing as well is when you're considering total package is the cost to you of work. So I mean, some years ago it was a real lesson for me, but again, transparency worked. I had a candidate who had two job offers. One was mine, I think it was 45k. One was 50k. So on paper, I think the benefits were broadly similar. On paper, it was a bit of a no-brainer because the other company was a decent company as well. But when we broke it down, the key difference was he'd have to commute into London, so that was £8,000 off his paycheck. Once you take tax into consideration, whereas the other company paid travel expenses from leaving his door. So actually, once you crunch numbers, the first offer at 10% below was probably worth about 10% more.
Yeah. And I think that understanding your costs as well as their salary package is really important. Edmund has said something, and I won't put it on the screen because it's towards the end of quite a long text. But first of all, as Greg asserts, stick to the basics. Tell the employer what sets you apart from the competition. Now, I have to say that for me, Edmund, that's actually quite an interesting phrase, because you have no idea who the competition is. Your job isn't actually, I don't think, to set yourself apart from the competition, on top of the competition, whatever phrase you want to use. I think your job is to put forward the best case you have for doing the job, because you don't know what everyone else is like. You don't know your competition. So
it might be a little facetious, but it's a question I'm asked when I'm talking to new companies. Anyway, why should we use you? What sets you apart from your competition? Well, I don't have any competition. I've no idea what you're getting from the other companies. So I don't know how to answer that, but why don't you tell me the issues that you got with your other suppliers, and we can start from there.
I think that, and there is, I don't, inevitably looking for a job is a competitive process, but we add extra layers of pressure on ourselves by thinking about things that we have no idea about, trying to imagine what other candidates look or think or whatever, and trying to pick them. As Greg said earlier, and as you say in your post, Evan, stick to the basics. And the basics is talking about you doing the job that the employer wants.
Exactly that. But plus, you don't actually have competition in an interview process. But they're not comparing you against each other, although sometimes that does happen. They're comparing you against the job. So all you can do is best show how you are suited to that job, and let the rest take care of itself.
Now, Robin's brought up an interest. I'll put someone on here because we interested. Malcolm said earlier, I thought I started a grenade when he threw in AI. Where the gradient seems to have landed on salaries. Regarding salary range, I'm always asked my expectations. I think, and I think don't think this is black and white. Location, scope of the role make a big difference. I agree completely.
Especially in the UK, I think we've got a really fragmented marketplace, and I'm based in the east of England. I think one of the reasons I'm a good recruiter is I've had to recruit into deepest, darkest Suffolk quite a bit. Competing against Cambridge and London, you've got to find a good, compelling reason for people to want to do that. And a marketing manager in Thetford might command 40 grand, a marketing manager in Cambridge might command 70 grand, and there might be similar businesses apart from that. It's definitely not black and white, and I think it's listening and learning and gaining insight so you can make a measured decision is important.
And I think probably the vast majority of us, unless we happen to be lottery winners, have a red line at the bottom. We're not going to drop below that because that's what I need. It's not what I want; it's what I need. So I'm not going to drop below that. But the point I think that Robin is making around scope of the role is sometimes we will step less. We will go less up from that base because we really want to do the role. We really like the company. There's something in there that has really excited us about the role. So we get a compensation that isn't financial. We get a compensation from doing the role. So I think putting a pin in a single number is always very, very dangerous. Have the conversations, understand the role, and understand the depth and breadth of the package.
I think if you're required to give some form of salary, and I'd never dissemble in a recruitment process. If people want to have a clear answer, try and give it to them with the caveat that part of a recruitment process is two-way, and you're learning about the scope of the role as you go through it, and inevitably that learning process will show a different role to what you saw initially when you applied. So if your insights changed over that time, I would feel perfectly free to say, well, actually, I did say that then, but now I know more about the role and how I can contribute against it. This is my expectation.
Yeah, I think that's, and I see that a lot through process with people, as they understand more, becoming more flexible, or sometimes less flexible.
Well, that's not you changing your mind. That's the fault of the recruitment process not being clear.
Yeah, I think so. I just think that some of the other comments that were made to me by HR directors, we've talked about manners and reliability, timekeeping, things like that. One HR director said, "I just wish my candidates would keep to the point. I would answer the question they're asked, not the question they wished I asked them." Which is sort of that political thing where you're watching Question Time and an audience member asks a question, someone on the panel answers a completely different question because that's the question they wanted the audience member to ask, and give them a platform to say what they do. And I think it is important that we, as candidates, we listen to the questions and answer the question. You may, after you've answered the question, you may give a little bit more colour, a little bit more background, a bit of experience, but always make sure that your first focus is to answer the question. Is that fair?
Well, yeah, I think if you consider looking for work to be a marketing exercise, so you're launching yourself as a product to market and the employer's on a buyer's journey, you have to give that process what it needs. And part of that involves answering questions.
Yeah, and keeping them relevant. That's another thing that was said on the session yesterday, is that because everyone has been coached to prepare for interviews now and use Glassdoor or use Google or whatever to research a company, when they want to, when a candidate wants to show this particular HR director they've done their research, they drop a fact in from their research. And they don't have to say, "I've researched your company a lot." They say this. And one of the others agreed. So I was on an interview recently, and I dropped in the fact that they had a 26% approval rating on such and such on their annual surveys. It let everyone know that they dug quite deep. What I would say is keep it relevant. So the example that an HR director gave, and I'm not sure if I would use this example too much myself, was that when I'm hiring for the post room, and someone talks to me about the global cash position of my business, then that isn't relevant. But equally, if I am hiring for a director role and they talk to me about inefficiencies of my post room, I probably think there's a gap there too. So trying to keep either the evidence that you've researched my company or your questions to me keep them relevant to the role, relevant to me, and relevant to you, rather than just throwing in things that really show off questions, really.
One of my footy mates, when I used to play footy before I knackered my knees, he runs a small business in Bury St Edmunds, and I think this is just coming out of the pandemic. Actually, he said to me he had this candidate for a sales role, and he said it was going really well, and then it came to them asking questions, and he said, "Oh, I've downloaded your accounts from Company's House. I see you made a loss in this year, and how are you going to get out of that?" And he said, "It just popped the bubble. I was no longer interested. He'd taken a snapshot of my business at quite a tough time, which we have come out of, but those accounts are more than a year prior, and he'd made some assumptions on the basis of it. So I think you have to remember why you're asking questions. I think questions can differentiate, but ultimately you ask questions to get meaningful answers.
Yeah, and you don't ask questions to make the interviewer feel uncomfortable. Yeah. That's not the purpose.
I mean, there's that stupid question. Oh, what am I missing from my application? Or why would you decline me? All these questions which seem like they're clever, but actually are putting people on the back foot.
Yeah, So the quote that I wrote down from the HR meeting was, "Don't revel in asking difficult questions, but have the courage to ask them if they're relevant."
But probing questions,
so you definitely. Yeah, probing questions are fine, but questions that are targeted at making the person on the other side of the desk feel uncomfortable don't work. Because I've walked out and people have, or I met someone coming out of an interview and said, "No, I'm not going to take it forward." They just made me feel uncomfortable. It should be a positive experience for both sides of the team.
But because imagine that point I made about the interview extrapolating your behaviour into what you like to work with. Can you imagine, like on a Monday, this person coming in saying, "Well, I've downloaded your accounts for last year. Is this why I'm not getting a bonus this year?" It's like, oh, I can look forward to that.
Yeah, and I've seen it in probably more in recruitment than anywhere else, where very forceful young recruiters have come into an interview when I've been hiring for a recruitment company with the single intention of showing that they're better than me. And I always came out of that room with the one feeling that there was one area that I was definitely better than them, and that was I was really working for the company they'd applied to. And it got up my nose. And maybe I'm weak and pathetic and fragile, but it really, I think, and I'm not the only interviewer who has had the experience of feeling that a candidate is trying to belittle me in an interview for some completely unknown reason. At the end of the last session, we did a very quick run through for the last 5 minutes, so we ended up on time. So we've now got 7 minutes left according to the clock here. What I was thinking we should do is, having had this discussion, is give our 5 top mistakes that are easy to avoid in the last 5 minutes. We've got 2 minutes for that. And it combines.
Well, let's whiz through some comments quickly, and it'll give me my brain a bit of time to get into mode.
Okay, so Malcolm's comments. Let's have a look at this. A lot of recruiters usually say you can hit the ground running, especially in financial services. They don't want to have to take time to coach, as it hurts the productivity of the team you've joined.
Says a lot about the environment, doesn't it? That they can't coach you, especially when we know that a good onboarding leads to successful outcomes. But also, what do they mean by that? What is it exactly that needs to be hit at pace to achieve what they need?
In my experience, people who tell you that you have to hit the floor running have also spent the 15 minutes before that telling you how they're different from every other employer, which makes it very difficult to hit the floor running because you clearly haven't experienced that culture or that proposition or that environment before. So I would take that with a little bit of a pinch of salt. The flash to bang time, the speed to productivity is a measurable model that many hiring managers will look at. They usually use it to beat up internal recruitment practice, in my experience. But I think that's a cultural statement. I think that's a cultural indicator. Hold on a second, I've gone back to the same one I was thinking. Let's see. Here's one. So this is from Robert. I applied for a role where the job spec changed as we entered the interview process, and I did not have all the qualifications. Nothing game stopping in my mind. Oh, in my mind, but that's the end of the
Quite
comment.
common. And a scenario might be new vacancy or a role that's significantly changed because of some context within the business, and they know they've got problems to solve, but they're not quite sure what that looks like in a person. So sometimes companies use the interview process to fine tune their thinking, so it can change on the fly. It shows a bit of a lack of preparation, but it's not insurmountable, especially if there's a core requirement that you can fulfill and the other negotiable things what come out in discussion. I don't know the end of that comment though, so
no, that was the end of it. I went looking
okay.
for it. That's what I got at the end of it in my mind. But ... I think that the advancement of thinking around a role is often informed by the people they meet. It's not free consulting. It's not that you've gone in and you've given them something that they don't.
That's how I recruit. We put a job spec aside and we look at what are the outcomes you want to achieve, and I mean you work back from that. And actually, often the real job description is quite different to that generic statement they pinched off a competitor.
And some jobs have really simple outcomes, and yet they have a 3-page job description. And that confuses candidates, I think. And I think as a candidate, if you are presented with a very comprehensive job description, I think that's great advice. Just try and strip it down to what the outcomes are. What do they want you to deliver in their business? Why are they going to pay you a certain amount of money every month to do something in their company? And what is that something? I think that's important. Malcolm has asked, I hope it's being recorded. Yes, it is, and it would appear on the event page, and I think it appears on my feed. And we're trying to get it onto your feed as well.
Get it on YouTube. So if anyone wants to add to my 2 followers, including me, you're welcome to.
And I will, because I feel really guilty that when you mentioned that I wasn't able to say I was the second, which I'm not.
50% increase right there. No context.
So a comment from Jay. I've seen people who like to make interviewees uncomfortable. They've always been high red leaders playing power games. Absolutely right. And there's no excuse for it. But
it's exactly the same comment, isn't it? You go into an interview as a candidate and you want to extrapolate the behaviour that you experience as to what that person's like to work with. So do you want to work for a high red leader? Well, I wouldn't, but then I've been self-employed for 14 years.
I think that's really interesting as well. One thing that we just have to do is be really clear, because I have managed recruitment processes, some enforced on the others I've designed, where candidates have met people that they will have little interaction with going forward in their employment. So you need to look at, he may be a terrible interviewer, and he's gone about that sort of bullying process of trying to make you feel uncomfortable. But if he's not actually going to play any part in the day-to-day experience of your employment, don't let that
people can change though. I had an interview process a couple of years ago for a senior HR role, and the global lead interviewed one candidate and scared the shit out of her through really direct, probing, awful questions, really made her feel belittled. So she pulled out, and then I fed back to my contact, who was kind of in between, and she said, right, I'm going to coach the global leader. And then the next candidate who was in there, feedback after that, really nice. Yeah, really liked her.
I certainly have seen over time interviewers get better in my assessment of them as interviewers, and usually almost invariably that means that they have put a candidate at some degree of comfort in the room. They have been very good at understanding what they needed to get and getting it, but not getting other stuff that's of no importance at all. But interviewers are not great. I mean, I in my experience, one of the lowest budgets, if it exists at all, is budget for training interviewers in a business.
Well, very few people do.
It never compares with the sales training budget or the professional budget in other departments. We will send, quite rightly maybe, we'll send people from our finance team off to go and get qualifications, and companies will pay for that. But the thought of paying their current employees to be better at getting more future employees into the business, it's such a hard battle. I've had it in so many companies trying to get organizations to invest in interviewing. So if we go into the room understanding that we're not going to meet a professional interviewer, I think that takes a little bit of pressure off us. And it's not our job to judge them, other than, is this a cultural indicator of the business that I'm talking about joining, I think. how's your head about those 5 quick?
Well, let's do it and see what happens.
Yeah. Oh, I've got. Hang on. There's one. I'm going to. This is my sister-in-law, so I'm going to mention this because otherwise she'll come around for Sunday lunch. And I won't have mentioned her comment on LinkedIn. So the advent of AI makes the interview process even more important.
Yeah,
An AI CV may get to interview, but you can't fake personality, engagement, mental agility to respond to questions, etc.
I've got quite a specific thought on this, and I think it's something that the government should look into, which is that if you're using AI to fabricate CVs, that's fraud, because you're reducing someone else's ability to get that job. So you're reducing their livelihood. So that is fraud. And I think people should consider that when they're going to use AI for anything. So I think as AI comes through, that's one area of law I think really needs to be considered. Because if you're telling the truth, AI is fair game. And as you say, if you go into an interview, it's not like you can have your phone with ChatGPT on it and say, hold on a minute, I'm just going to get an answer to this.
And I think that's again about writing for human beings and removing the technical aspect. I think it's a really interesting, because of course any lie in a CV amounts to fraud.
Yeah, or grey areas like nameism.
Yeah. I don't know if we have any CV writers on, and I may be completely wrong.
For me, it's whether or not it takes away from someone else's application. So if you're fudging dates, and it's not a lie of substance. If you're changing your name because people are discriminating against you, then fair enough. But if you're fabricating stuff which substantively changes the nature of your candidacy, that is fraud, whichever way you cut it.
And I'd love to know from. So I have a suspicion, it may be ill-founded, that when we get a CV that's been improved by AI, we take it at face value, because we kind of take the top off. We kind of have an unreasonable respect for AI and go, if it's AI, it's got to be right. So, and we don't then go and
would you ask your friend for that advice?
Yeah, but would you, when you get your CV back from the CV, and I know a few CV writers, and they often talk about reworking CVs because their initial work is questioned by the candidate. If we question AI advice when it comes back, I think we take it for granted. And I think,
don't forget, all it does is pass other people's content. If you're using large language models, that is like ChatGPT or Claude, so it can only ever be generic, unless you ask it to fabricate. But then that's fraud.
Yeah, and I've had a number of occasions in my recruitment career where I know that someone is not telling the truth in an interview, and I've read CVs that I know are not true because I know the organisation. So when I worked in the world of SAP, people would have claimed to have worked on a particular SAP implementation, but they worked for the wrong company because that company didn't implement that for that client. And you know these things because you have an understanding of the market. It's I think it's very difficult, and if you get away with it in the interview process, you won't get away with it in employment, and you'll feel guilty, and you will feel uncomfortable.
Robert's got to stand the AI hole, and he said, "I've heard of AI interviews. Can we not send our candidate AI to interview?" And actually, I think that's a really genuine concept, because deepfakes are becoming easier and easier to do, and there are solutions on the market that have AI avatars. I don't know how well they work at the moment, but I've seen them in the wild, and they're only going to get better and quickly. And fair play, if someone's going to ask you to do an AI interview, why wouldn't you use every tool at your disposal? And if you've got that AI avatar to say it truthfully, then it's an argument that you can use. But I think we'll see a time where either things like biometrics will mean that somewhere proving the veracity of that video call. Or in-person interviews, if you've heard of those, handwritten application forms.
The application form given to you in reception.
Exactly, but with your passport.
I have created an AI avatar, and we were really interested to see how quickly it would work, and we just wanted it to be a signposting device. So we gave it 100,000 words of different content from books and guides and things that we've written over the years. We put it all into a single PDF, which is what this particular software demanded, and gave it to the AI tool, and you would talk to it, and there'd be a person on your screen. You talk to it, and it would instantaneously tell you what page to go to find each piece. We don't like, there are things we want to improve on it at the moment, but it was absolutely shocking. Talk about deep fake. That we could have made it George Clooney. We didn't. It was the people I'm working with are trying to make it look like me, which seems to be a very bad idea. But I was amazed, taking your point, of how incredibly efficient and fast working it was. And we are not a long time away from software. You can always do it now. Software can create an AI avatar, and you can feed information into its back office.
But employers forget that, and the drive to improve technology and implement AI ultimately is the candidate's choice whether they take part.
Yeah. And I can't help feeling that as we're now all being encouraged to go back to work, the Zoom interview has a level of popularity that it didn't have pre-pandemic. And I can't help feeling that sooner or later, that's either is or will be used by employers to their benefit, where they don't have to do so much work and they can put an AI human being at one end. But equally, they need to be aware that is available to individuals too. Right, enough waffle. Your five most important mistakes that you think recruiters make.
Job seekers, mate. I can give you a million that I make.
I apologise to all recruiters who might be listening to this. No, job seekers. Job seekers, mate.
Number one is lack of preparation.
Yeah.
I think prepare everything. Prepare your career identity. Prepare your CV in the right way. Prepare which channels you use to access the market, whether that's job boards or networking. Which feeds into number two, that there isn't a jobs market. There is only a specific jobs market unique to you. And you prepare by understanding what that jobs market is, which leads into number three, which is accepting these really strong bits of advice are always going to be right in your context. So I think, prepare by challenging whether it does relate to you. Is it replicable? Mistake number four, that your job search is about you. It's not. It's about your next employer. You have to get yourself out of your you bubble and think, what's in it for them in everything you do. So your CV has to be about your reader. It's not about what you do. It's about the problems that you solve. Same with the interview. Obviously you need to get information for yourself, but you need to show those people what you like to work with, the outcomes that you reach, and the problems that you solve. And then number five, I think, is taking what's happening in the market on our own shoulders too much. I think a bit of stoicism and separating what's happening to you from the things that you can affect change in, and focus on those things that you can affect change, and keep the courage of your convictions that you're brilliant at what you do and you're of value to your next employer. That's my five.
That's your five. Brilliant. One thing I'll just throw in quickly is that your YouTube channel subscriptions just gone up by 50%.
No, 33%.
Oh, 33%. Sorry, 33%. So
number six is get your maths right.
Yeah, and get your base numbers right as well. So actually, in about 10-15 minutes, the people who have been watching this are going to go, hang on a second, Simon got Greg to do 5 at the end of that, but he didn't do 5 himself. You're absolutely right, and it shouldn't have taken you 15 minutes to spot that. But we're now at 10 minutes past 2, so those. It's only because I can't beat your 5.
The only problem with the YouTube channel is I don't actually know what it's publishing. So it might have published a highly confidential chat at the beginning, and it might publish what we talk about afterwards. So
what
check that quickly.
Everything that we say that might come up either before or after this publishing should be pre-set with the alleged. Obviously, everything is alleged. There's a great. I don't know if you see him very quickly. I've got a minute, but very, very quickly. Nigel Farage on Have I Got News for You was introduced as a guy who's an equal opportunity employer because the money he gets from the European Parliament is split equally between his wife and his girlfriend. and Nigel Farage was sitting in the studio and he said, I think really that second part should be allegedly, don't you? And I thought he handled it brilliantly. That is just one of those things. By the way, it is 10 past 2. Hopefully this has been useful. Please continue to put your comments onto the events page. Greg and I do go and have a look. But I think we got to most of the comments today. And if I didn't, I apologise. They've been very useful. I really enjoyed actually some new faces, which was fantastic, and some really good insight to what's going on out in the market, which is what we're looking for on a Wednesday at 1 o'clock. So thank you very, very much for coming on board. Thank you very much, Greg. Thank you for doing your 5. And I haven't even got off the hook. I didn't even put the hook there.
I'm taking a tally of it, Simon. Next week is going to be all the ones you
It's
didn't.
a really bad job hunters help desk, isn't there? Where it's all just me, Simon, do 5 of those, do 3 of those, and I'll just melt. So we'll leave that. I really appreciate everyone's time, and we'll both be back 1 o'clock next Wednesday. See you then. Cheers.